cut an 18-inch piece off this board, and this board was the center of the tree, as you can see there. So these are what are called quarter sawn boards, and they're more stable than boards cut from out on the edge of the tree. So this is nice. The problem is that this is usually not a very good area. Also, sorry about my fingers. That's Gorilla Glue. If you use enough Gorilla Glue, your hands look like the gorilla in the advert. It comes off after a couple of years. So what I'm doing now is I'm having a look to see what might be going on in this board, because some of it has pretty major cracks. And there are a couple little knots here, and as we go around to the other side, there they are. There's what might be a sort of a bad place. There's a fairly major knot. Let's see if it goes through. Yep, that one goes right through sort of diagonally. So I'm going to try to avoid that thing if I can. If I can't, we may have something that we just have to fill. I mean, I'm not going to sacrifice the board over one knot. There's another one, and this one does not go through unless this is it over there. It's going way diagonally, or this may be the remainder of it, but it doesn't seem to go right through, so maybe we can deal with that. But it's with a board like this, it's just guessing. I mean, who knows what's in there? I don't know what's in there until I cut it open, and I don't want to just saw it up into strips to find out.
So what can you tell me about the type of wood and where it's from and so forth?
This is poplar, and our understanding is it came from Pennsylvania. Our understanding is it's very old, and it looks pretty old to me, because I can at least just see the growth rings here coming out around from what was the sapling here, and the growth rings are tight together, which means this thing grew up in a fairly dense forest. And poplar, maybe it still gets as big as this, but I've never seen one as big as this. Mm-hmm. You know, I believe it's an old tree. It was an old tree when it was cut down, and it was cut down a long time ago, because as a tree, and you can see it still has its outside edges, as a tree it stood up like this, stood straight up, and was the post holding up the frame of a barn.
Oh.
And still, when one saws it, smells vaguely barny, but it would after all those years,
yeah.
Of course. But anyway, we got this beautiful board. The remains of it are over there on the sawhorses. That's under the various stuff there. It's about a 4-foot piece of it, but it was a 12-foot long board when I started out here, and absolutely beautiful. Just a beautiful, beautiful thing. The trick now is to try to maximize the window frame pieces coming out of here. This is what one of the window frames that we're making look like. This is half of the frame. Is that okay in terms of being able to see it?
Sure.
Junk out of the way. This is what we're making. It's half of an arch top window frame from Narcissus. It had a tragic design flaw in that they made it out of one piece of poplar, because they had lots of wide poplar, and when it came down to the end here, the grain was running sideways, so almost all of them were broken off and had lost these end pieces. In fact, they'd gone by the wayside. Luckily, very luckily for us, we had this one that had all of its pieces. These two, when I first saw it, were nailed onto the car, and it's damn good luck for us that somebody did, because with this one we at least know what they look like. But this is what we're trying to make. It turns out it's a pretty complicated piece of wood to make, but we can talk about that as we go along. There's another Narcissus frame which occurs at only one end of the car, which is a smaller arch, and same stroke of extraordinarily good luck, we have one that has all its pieces, and that's just amazing, because on this thing you can see where the cracks are, the grain just turns and is running sideways on those ends, and they probably snapped off as they drove it out of the factory in Laconia. I would think the ground outside just covered with little pieces of broken off end, but I don't know that. So I'm going to try to get some of the pieces of this out of here. Strategically, what we're doing is we've broken this thing into 3 pieces for the purpose of remaking, and we're putting seams in it. I made, almost first off here, I made a pattern for this thing by tracing this thing, and then sanding and routing and doing various things. But this is my master pattern because this is exactly the shape these things should be. And I had to get it down to something that I could easily trace. And this isn't easy to trace because it's hollow under here and some of them are rough and ready. But this line actually doesn't show very well, but I can draw it in for you. We've broken this thing for the purpose of reconstruction into 3 pieces. This piece, this curved piece, and then the little tail, and we'll join them together. I'm trying to make the very best use of the log I can and trying to squeak every square inch of it out because we'll need all of it and maybe a little bit more, but I'd like this to be the material that goes into the arches, and if we have to have other little pieces here and there from something else, that's okay.
Could you talk about the challenges with using, say, poplar that might be available in a lumber yard today?
The challenges for poplar that's available today, I think, it would be easier to use. I'm not sure it would weather as well. And that's the problem, I think, is that this stuff, because it has tight growth rings, is more likely to weather. Now, we, of course, hope this car will never, ever, ever be out in the rain again, ever. But for stability, it's difficult to beat the tight growth rings, where a young tree would have very large growth rings. I don't know if we can find a thing as wide as this. I don't know much about poplar, though. I don't use poplar. My first big experience with poplar, in fact, because it's a pretty soft wood. And I think they used it because it was cheap and plentiful. They were going to paint it anyway. Yeah. So it didn't matter. And as long as it has paint on it, it's fine. And the ones of these, some of these guys had a pretty good coat of paint. Some of them didn't. And the ones that didn't really weathered badly. So paint makes an enormous difference here. Even what's a fairly thin coat of paint left on here. So I think if it's given a good paint, it probably lasts as well as anything. But it would have been easier to obtain new poplar. And aside from the fact that it might have been smaller in width, it might have been easier to use. But it's a museum philosophy that we should be using old wood on old cars, and I certainly have no problems with that. I think that's what we ought to do.